Why do we return to the places that broke us? That's the question Aria asked herself as she steered the rental sedan into the high school parking lot 10 years after graduation. The building looked smaller than she remembered, less threatening. The brick facade that once felt like a prison now just looked tired, worn down by a decade of weather and indifference. But she knew better than to trust appearances. Some things don't change just because time passes. Some wounds don't close just because you walk away. The parking lot was already half full. Luxury SUVs and sports cars clustered near the entrance like a status symbol convention. She didn't have either. Just a generic sedan chosen for utility, not impression. Practical, forgettable, exactly how she liked it. As she pulled into the only available spot near the entrance, high beams suddenly flooded her mirrors, blinding white light that made her squint and turn away. A gleaming SUV swerved aggressively into her path, blocking her driver's side door. Bass-heavy music rattled her windows, vibrating through the metal frame and into her chest. She recognized the type immediately. The kind of person who uses volume to announce their presence, who needs the world to know they've arrived. The driver leaned out, arm draped over the window frame like he owned the asphalt beneath them. Trent. She remembered him. Used to copy her math homework in algebra. Never said thank you. Just expected it, like she owed him her intelligence because she didn't have his social standing. He squinted at her through the glare of his own headlights, not recognizing her at first, then his face shifted into something between amusement and contempt. "Move your scrap metal," he shouted over the music, tossing his valet keys toward her windshield like she was hired help. "Real guests need to park." Aria didn't move, didn't react, just stared through the glass with the kind of calm that comes from facing things far more dangerous than inflated egos in parking lots. Her pulse didn't quicken. Her breathing didn't change. She just waited, patient and still, like a sniper in position. Trent's smirk faltered. Something in her stillness unnerved him, though he'd never admit it. He huffed, reversed with a squeal of tires that left rubber marks on the pavement, and sped off toward the VIP section, whatever that meant at a high school reunion. She was left to shimmy out of her door into a deep puddle of cold, stagnating mud, the first stain on her night, but she wore it like camouflage, just another texture, another layer of the person she'd become. As she wiped the mud from her boots, a teenager stepped in front of her with a clipboard held like a shield. A student volunteer, probably instructed by the alumni committee on who mattered and who didn't. His eyes swept over her plain hoodie and jeans, the practical steel-reinforced boots that had seen better days and worse terrain. He didn't even check the list. "Excuse me, ma'am." His voice carried the rehearsed authority of someone given power for the first time. "The service entrance for vendors and kitchen staff is around the back." He pointed toward a dark alley that smelled of rotting vegetables and overflowing dumpsters. "This walkway is reserved for ticket-holding alumni and their guests only." She looked at him, really looked, not with anger or hurt, but with the kind of assessment that comes from years of reading situations in seconds, deciding who's a threat and who's just following orders. Above the main doors, a banner read "Welcome Class of 2015" in bold letters. She looked back at the boy, her expression unchanged, and simply sidestepped him. The movement was so fluid, so efficient, that he didn't register she'd passed until she was already 3 strides ahead. He blinked at the empty space where she'd been standing, confused by her utter lack of compliance. She didn't argue, didn't explain, just moved forward, because some battles aren't worth fighting with words. The heavy double doors opened to reveal a time capsule, blue and gold balloons, a banner declaring "Class of 2015, 10 years stronger." Generic pop music from their teenage years played softly in the corner, making a few people sway with manufactured nostalgia. Tables lined the walls with punch bowls and finger foods, and groups clustered around, aggressively swapping stories about mortgages and divorces, each trying to prove they'd won at life. Aria scanned the room with the tactical precision of someone trained to spot threats. Her eyes moved in a grid pattern, cataloging familiar faces that hadn't changed much except for a few extra lines and pounds. She headed toward the sign-in table, where a woman with perfectly highlighted hair and a name tag reading Belle Hart, event coordinator, stood smiling at everyone who approached. Belle looked up as Arya got closer. Her smile froze for a split second before turning into something sharper, colder, like a knife edge catching the light. Back in school, Belle had been the one organizing pep rallies and deciding who sat where at lunch, wielding social capital like a weapon. Now she wore a dress that hugged her figure, makeup flawless, nails done in a fresh, expensive manicure. She tilted her head, eyeing Arya up and down with performative pity. "Oh, Arya," her voice carried just loud enough for nearby people to hear. "I almost didn't recognize you. Thought you might be here to help with the cleanup crew or something." A couple of people snickered, eager to be in on the joke, eager to belong. Arya reached for the pen to sign in, her hands steady and calloused. "Just here like everyone else." Belle leaned in, lowering her voice but not really, ensuring her cruelty was audible. "Well, I'm glad you made it. I mean, we weren't sure if you'd show. Heard things have been tough." She straightened up, but instead of handing over one of the laminated printed badges clipped onto lanyards that every other attendee wore, Belle dug into a cardboard box under the table and produced a handwritten sticker. The red ink was smudged and fatting. She slapped it onto Arya's chest with a little too much force, her acrylic nails digging briefly into Arya's collarbone in a microaggression disguised as assistance. "We ran out of the official ones for the late RSVPs, Belle lied smoothly, her eyes darting to the stack of unclaimed pre-printed badges clearly visible on the table, alphabetically sorted and waiting. "And honestly, we didn't want to waste the budget printing one if you weren't going to show up. You know how expensive cardstock is these days." She gestured vaguely at Arya's hoodie, wiping her hand on a sanitizer wipe as if she'd touched something contagious. A contagion of failure she needed to scrub off. The degradation didn't end there. Inside, the room buzzed with conversation. Old friends reconnecting, old rivals sizing each other up, old flames avoiding eye contact. Arya moved through it all like a ghost, present but unseen, until she tried to sit down. Every chair she approached seemed suddenly taken. People who'd been casually leaning would suddenly claim the seat was saved. Groups would close their circles just as she got close, shoulders turning inward like fortress walls. She ended up near the back, in the corner by the fire exit, standing alone while everyone else laughed and clinked glasses. That's when she noticed him. Mr. Tiller, her old English teacher, the one who used to read her essays aloud in class, not to praise her writing but to mock her for caring too much about books while other kids cared about sports and parties. He was at the buffet table, loading his plate with cheese cubes and crackers, wearing the same tweed jacket with elbow patches he'd worn a decade ago. He caught her eye and walked over, that familiar condescending smile already forming. "Arya," he said her name like it was a punchline. "Still reading those fantasy novels, or did you finally join the real world?" She didn't answer, just held his gaze with the kind of quiet that makes people uncomfortable. He chuckled nervously and walked away, but not before adding loud enough for others to hear, "Some people never change." The irony wasn't lost on her. She stood there back against the wall watching them all perform their success, watching them measure their worth in job titles and square footage and vacation destinations. And she felt nothing, not anger, not hurt, just a strange kind of peace that comes from knowing your value isn't tied to their approval. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The radio clipped to her belt crackled softly, a coded signal, a sharp burst of static that carried more information in a split second than these people could articulate in a lifetime. She adjusted it slightly, her fingers moving with practiced ease, and someone nearby noticed. "What's that?" a woman named Jenna asked, eyeing the device with suspicion. "Some kind of walkie-talkie. Are you working security or something?" Laughter rippled through the group. The idea that Arya might be working the event rather than attending it seemed to delight them. It confirmed their assumptions, validated their cruelty. "Something like that," Arya said quietly, her voice steady and unyielding. And that's when he appeared. Who decides when the past stops haunting you? Cadden Raoul pushed through the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. He looked exactly like he did in high school, just older. Same practiced grin, same swagger, same need to be the center of attention. He was the guy who'd made her life miserable back then, the one who'd started rumors, who'd knocked her books out of her hands in the hallway just to watch her scramble to pick them up, who'd convinced half the school she didn't belong. Now he stood in front of her, arms crossed over his chest like he'd just won a championship game that no one else was playing. His friends flanked him, a chorus of enablers ready to laugh at whatever cruelty he'd deliver. "Arya," he said her name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "You're still the class loser. No one's waiting for you." The words hung in the air, heavy, poisonous, the kind of insult designed to cut deep and leave scars. The crowd around them went quiet, watching, waiting to see how she'd react. Some covered their mouths in faux politeness. Others didn't bother hiding their disdain. This was entertainment for them, a spectacle. Arya didn't flinch, didn't drop her gaze, didn't offer a single micro-expression of hurt. She just stood there, calm as still water before a storm, and adjusted the small, ruggedized radio clipped to her belt, the one that looked like any old walkie-talkie to their untrained eyes. The laughter started, jagged, insecure, the sound of people who needed to tear someone down to feel elevated. They thought she was pretending to be important, thought the radio was a prop, a joke, something to mock. But then the floor trembled. Just slightly at first, a vibration that most people dismissed as a truck passing outside, but Arya felt it in her bones, recognized it. The coded alert had warned her. She lifted her head, her expression steady and unyielding, untouched by their mockery, almost too calm, like the eye of a storm waiting to collapse. The ground shook again, harder this time, vibrating through the soles of their shoes. Someone near the window pointed outside in confusion, squinting into the darkness beyond the glass. A low rumble built in the distance, growing louder, deeper, like thunder rolling across the sky. But it wasn't thunder. It was something else entirely. Cadden's smirk faltered. He looked at Arya, then at the window, then back at Arya, his confidence cracking like thin ice under pressure. The laughter died in his throat. And that's when they saw it. Through the window, descending from the night sky with rotor blades cutting through the air like judgment itself, an AH-64 Apache attack helicopter, black against the darkness, massive, powerful, real. The noise was deafening, a mechanical roar that shook the building's foundation and rattled the windows in their frames. People stumbled backward, hands over their ears, eyes wide with shock and fear. The punch bowl tipped over. Balloons popped from the pressure change. Someone screamed. The music cut out, drowned by the sound of military-grade engines hovering just outside their high school reunion. Arya stood perfectly still, not surprised, not scared, just waiting. The Apache's searchlight flared to life, flooding the parking lot with white-hot brilliance that turned night into day. It swept across the crowd gathered at the windows, blinding them, forcing them to look away. The downdraft from the rotors tore through the outdoor setup, sending tablecloths flying, chairs tumbling across the asphalt, decorations scattering like leaves in a hurricane. The carefully arranged tent collapsed in seconds, metal poles bending under the force. Cadden's face went pale. Belle's perfectly styled hair whipped around her head as the wind hit the building. Mr. Tiller dropped his plate, cheese cubes rolling across the floor. Jenna backed away from the window, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. The Apache settled into a hover just above the parking lot, its landing gear extended, its weapons systems visible even in the darkness. This wasn't a flyover. This wasn't a coincidence. This was precision, purpose, a statement delivered in rotor blades and engine thrust. Arya reached for her radio, spoke into it with the calm, clipped tone of someone who did this for a living. Ground to Apache 7, confirmed visual, proceeding to extraction point. A voice crackled back through the static, professional, military. Copy that, warrant officer, stand by for dust-off, your ride's here. Warrant officer. The words hit the crowd like a second shockwave. They stared at her, really saw her for the first time. Not the girl they remembered from homeroom, not the loser they dismissed, but a Marine attack pilot, someone who commanded machines of war, someone who'd earned her place in the sky while they were posting brunch selfies and complaining about traffic. Arya adjusted the radio on her belt and walked toward the exit. No hurry, no drama, just steady forward motion. The crowd parted without a word, stepping back like she carried an invisible force field. Their faces were a mixture of shock, shame, and dawning realization. They'd mocked a wolf they'd mistaken for a sheep. Belle tried to say something. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. What do you say to someone you just humiliated when it turns out they're the one with real power? Cadden stood frozen, his arms hanging at his sides, his practiced grin completely gone. Mr. Tiller looked like he'd swallowed something bitter, his face twisted in a mixture of embarrassment and fear. As Arya reached the door, she paused, turned back, looked at them all one last time, not with anger, not with triumph, just with the quiet certainty of someone who knows their worth isn't determined by the opinions of people who peaked in high school. Sometimes, she said, her voice carrying over the roar of the Apache, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And then she was gone. She walked out into the parking lot, into the hurricane of wind and noise, her boots crunching on scattered gravel and torn decorations. The Apache's searchlight tracked her movement, bathing her in light. The side door slid open, and a crew member extended a hand. She took it, pulled herself up with practiced ease, and the door slid shut behind her. Inside the gym, the crowd pressed against the windows, watching in stunned silence as the Apache lifted off. The downdraft scattered everything that wasn't nailed down. Car alarms triggered across the parking lot. The reunion banner tore free from the building and disappeared into the night. The machine climbed into the sky, its lights blinking red and green against the darkness, and then it was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. What does it cost to prove you're more than they thought you were? In the aftermath, no one moved. They stood there in the wreckage of their carefully planned reunion, surrounded by overturned tables and scattered decorations, staring at the empty sky where the Apache had been. The noise still rang in their ears. The image of Arya climbing into that helicopter burned into their minds like a brand. Cadden was the first to break. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet, and sank into a chair that had somehow survived the chaos. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get them into his pockets. He looked at the spot where the Apache had hovered, then at his friends. The look in their eyes wasn't camaraderie anymore. It was shock, accusation, fear. He had led them into mocking someone who commanded weapons of war, someone who protected the freedom they used to be cruel. Belle stood near the ruined buffet table, mascara starting to run from tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Her perfect makeup cracking like her carefully constructed world. She'd built her entire identity on being the queen, the one who decided who mattered. And in less than 5 minutes, a helicopter had rendered all of that meaningless. Someone's phone buzzed, then another and another. Within seconds, everyone was pulling out their devices, fingers scrolling frantically through notifications. The video was already online. Someone had filmed the whole thing, the Apache descending, Arya's calm exit, the chaos left behind. It was spreading fast, shared, retweeted, going viral. The comments were brutal. Imagine mocking someone, and their rescue helicopter shows up. That's not just any helicopter. That's an Apache. She's not playing. The class loser just became everyone's hero. They messed with the wrong person. The video had been posted from multiple angles. Someone had captured Cadden's insult, the moment he called her a loser, the laughter that followed, and then the arrival of the Apache. The contrast was devastating, his cruelty juxtaposed with her quiet power, his smug grin replaced by pale-faced shock. It told a story in under 2 minutes, and the internet was ruthless with judgment. Mr. Tiller watched his phone screen, his face going from red to white as he read comment after comment calling him out. Someone had tagged him, used his full name, listed the school where he taught. Parents were already commenting, saying they didn't want a teacher who mocked veterans, who bullied former students, who represented everything wrong with people who think they're better than others. Derek, the guy who'd offered Arya $20 to be his driver, sat in his luxury car outside, watching the video on his phone. He remembered her face when he'd made that offer, the way she'd looked at him with absolutely no reaction, like he wasn't even worth acknowledging. He'd thought she was broke, desperate, someone he could use for cheap labor. Now he realized she'd probably made more in a month than he made in a year, and she commanded millions of dollars worth of military equipment. His hands gripped the steering wheel. The keyless entry remote fell from his lap onto the floor. He didn't pick it up, just sat there, staring at the video, realizing he'd tried to hire a Marine attack pilot as his chauffeur. Inside the gym, Jenna was already trying damage control. She deleted her GoFundMe joke comment from social media, but it was too late. Screenshots had been captured, shared. People were flooding her real estate page with one-star reviews. Lacks character, bullying behavior. Would never trust someone like this with the biggest purchase of my life. Her business page notifications exploded. Angry messages, canceled appointments, clients pulling out of deals. She tried to explain, tried to say it was just a joke, but the internet doesn't care about intentions when the impact is clear. Within an hour, she had to shut down her business page completely. Her carefully built reputation crumbling faster than the reunion tent in the Apache's downdraft. Todd, the MC who joked about Arya's unemployment, stood in the corner of the gym, his phone pressed to his ear. His boss was calling, or rather, his former boss. The company's board had seen the video, seen him publicly humiliating a decorated service member, and they'd made a decision. "We can't have this representing our brand," the voice on the other end said. "Cold, final. You're terminated effective immediately. HR will contact you about severance and benefits. Clean out your desk tomorrow." The call ended. Todd stared at his phone, unable to process what just happened. One joke, one cheap laugh at someone else's expense, and now his career was over. His stock options, his corner office, his reputation, all of it gone because he wanted to feel superior to someone who actually understood what service meant. The crowd in the gym began to disperse, not with laughter or fond goodbyes, but with shame, quiet, heavy shame that settled over them like fog. They avoided eye contact, slipped out through different exits, left their half-eaten food and abandoned drinks behind. The party was over. Not because the night was done, but because the illusion had shattered. They'd come to prove they'd won at life, to show off their success, to measure themselves against each other and feel good about where they'd landed. But Arya hadn't been playing that game. She'd been living a different life entirely. One where success wasn't measured in luxury cars and job titles, but in skill, service, and the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't need validation from people who don't matter. As they drove home through the dark streets, past the scattered debris in the parking lot, past the tire marks and broken decorations, each of them carried the weight of their actions. The words they'd said, the laughter they'd shared, the cruelty they'd participated in, and the undeniable truth that they'd mocked someone far more accomplished, far more important, and far more valuable than any of them could claim to be. The video kept spreading. By midnight, it had 500,000 views. By morning, 2 million. News outlets picked it up. Class bullies get reality check from Apache helicopter. Marine pilot responds to reunion mockery with ultimate mic drop. When karma comes with rotor blades. The internet detectives went to work. They found Arya's service record. Someone leaked it. Deployments, commendations, humanitarian aid missions, real work. real sacrifice. While Cadden was posting brunch selfies, she was risking her life. While Belle was planning parties, Arya was saving lives. While Mr. Tiller was lecturing about character in a classroom, she was demonstrating it in combat zones. The contrast was stark, damning, undeniable. And the people who'd laughed at her, who dismissed her, who treated her like she was less than them, now had to face the truth. They were the losers. They always had been. They just hadn't realized it until an Apache helicopter showed up to make it clear. Why does the truth always arrive too late to stop the damage? Monday morning came like a reckoning. Cadden sat in his boss's office, his leg bouncing nervously, his palms sweating. The video played on the computer screen between them, his voice clear as day. "You're still the class loser. No one's waiting for you." His face smug, confident, cruel. His boss watched it twice, didn't say a word until it finished. Then he folded his hands on the desk and looked at Cadden with the expression of someone making a difficult but necessary decision. "We can't have this representing our brand," he said, the same words Todd had heard, the same cold finality. "Your behavior reflects on this company. We pride ourselves on respect, integrity, and service to our community. This," he gestured at the screen, "this is the opposite of everything we stand for." "It was just a joke," Cadden tried, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't know she was." "That's the problem." His boss cut him off. "You didn't need to know who she was to treat her with basic human decency. The fact that she turned out to be a decorated service member just makes it worse. But even if she wasn't, your behavior would still be unacceptable." The words hung there, true, irrefutable. "Clear out your desk by end of day. HR will discuss your severance package." Cadden walked out of that office knowing his reputation was ruined. The swagger was gone. The confidence shattered. Every job application would be tainted by this video. Every interview would eventually circle back to it. He'd become a cautionary tale, a meme, the guy who mocked a Marine pilot and lost everything. Belle's phone wouldn't stop ringing, but not with new clients, with cancellations. The wedding she'd been planning for months, the one that would have been her biggest commission, canceled. The bride's message was short and direct. "Saw the video, don't want bad energy at my wedding. Sending final payment for work completed. Do not contact me again." Her social media mentions were a nightmare. Thousands of comments, most of them variations on the same theme. "This is who you really are. Karma caught up with you. Pretty on the outside, ugly on the inside." Her carefully curated image, years of building her brand as a high-end event coordinator, destroyed in a single night. She tried to salvage it, posted a tearful video claiming it was all taken out of context, that she and Arya were actually close friends back in the day, that people didn't understand the full story. But the internet never forgets. Within hours, someone dug up old yearbook photos, screenshots of social media posts from a decade ago, evidence of Belle's cruelty dating back to high school, her leading the charge against Arya, her organizing exclusion, her using popularity as a weapon. The compilation video was titled, "They Were Mean Then, They're Mean Now." Karma just finally showed up with rockets. It got 3 million views. Her biggest client, a corporate events firm that handled Fortune 500 companies, sent a formal letter terminating their contract. "Your conduct does not align with our values." Her empire of popularity, built on exclusion and cruelty, collapsed under the weight of truth. Everything she'd worked for, reduced to rubble because she couldn't resist one more moment of feeling superior. Mr. Tiller's downfall was quieter but no less devastating. The school board called an emergency meeting. Parents had been emailing, complaining, demanding action. How could they trust a teacher who publicly mocked a former student, who demonstrated such poor judgment, who represented everything they didn't want their children to become? He tried to explain, tried to say he'd just been making conversation, that people were overreacting, but the video didn't lie. His condescending tone, his dismissive comments, The way he'd treated Arya like she was still a student he could talk down to. They offered him early retirement, made it clear it wasn't optional. By the end of the week, he was cleaning out his classroom. 30 years of teaching ended because he couldn't let go of the need to feel superior. He drove home to an empty house, his legacy not the wisdom he thought he'd imparted, but the cruelty he'd modeled. That afternoon, he went to his usual coffee shop, the place where he'd held court for years, lecturing the young staff about life and literature. The manager, a former student, took his order without a word. When the coffee came, there was writing on the cup. Not his name, just one word. Observer. He looked up, she stared back at him, cold, unimpressed, and he understood. He wasn't the mentor he'd believed himself to be. He was the person who watched others be cruel and did nothing, or worse, participated. The shame burned hotter than the coffee. He left it untouched on the counter and walked out. Derek found his car keyed a week later, not with profanity, not with insults, just coordinates, the exact latitude and longitude of the high school. He stood in the parking lot, staring at the numbers etched into his paint, and felt a chill run down his spine. Someone was watching, someone remembered, and he couldn't prove who did it. The police took his report with noticeable lack of enthusiasm. They'd seen the video too. One officer, a veteran, barely looked at him while taking notes. "Insurance will cover it," he said, not even trying to hide his indifference. Derek's premium skyrocketed, and every time he pulled into a parking lot after that, he checked the sky. A lingering paranoia that he was being watched by something much bigger than him. He stopped wearing his varsity jacket. It suddenly felt like a costume for a child. The reunion committee received a formal letter, Department of Defense letterhead, official seal, a detailed invoice for specialized engine filter replacement required after the Apache ingested foreign object debris, balloons, confetti, decorations from their event. The cost was staggering, more than the entire reunion budget, more than they could pay without going into personal debt. Belle stared at the number until her eyes watered. Tens of thousands of dollars. The letter noted that civilian negligence was the cause, that proper airspace clearance had been filed, that the event coordinators were personally liable. Her alumni fund was drained, her savings depleted. For years to come, every time she looked at her bank account, she'd be reminded of that night, of the helicopter, of Arya. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They tried to make Arya feel small, and in doing so, they'd bankrupted themselves. The internet's justice was even more precise. They found every person who'd laughed, every person who'd participated, tagged them, named them. Their employers saw it, their families saw it. Their reputations crumbled. Some lost jobs, others lost contracts. A few lost relationships when partners realized who they'd really married. The message was clear. Cruelty has consequences. Mockery has costs. And in the age of smartphones and viral videos, everything is documented. Everything is permanent. And everyone will see exactly who you are when you think no one important is watching. But there was one more thing coming. One final piece of the puzzle that no one expected. What happens when the person you broke decides to build something better? A month passed. The reunion became legend. The video remained online, a permanent record of consequence meeting cruelty. But Arya never commented on it, never responded to interview requests, never posted about it on social media. She simply returned to base, filed her reports, and prepared for her next mission. Her silence spoke louder than any statement could have. Then the high school received a notification, a massive donation, anonymous, more money than they'd seen in a decade, enough to completely renovate the science labs and rebuild the library, the spaces where Arya had hidden during her years of torment, the places where she'd taught herself to dream bigger than the walls around her. The donation came with one condition. The class of 2015 plaque in the entrance hall had to be removed, replaced with something different, a mural. The design was specific, detailed, already approved by the artist. The principal agreed immediately. When Cadden and Bell drove past the school a few weeks later, they saw workers prying their class year off the brick. Their legacy, their marker of achievement, being pulled down and tossed into a construction dumpster like garbage. In its place, a mural was taking shape, beautiful, powerful, a figure standing alone against a storm, head held high, unbroken. The words beneath it read, "Dedicated to quiet resilience for those who endure." They didn't need to ask who funded it, they knew. Their names, once etched in stone as part of 10 Years Stronger, were erased. Their legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness, when they assume silence means defeat, when they forget that some people don't need to prove anything because they've already proven everything that matters. Arya's message was clear. She hadn't returned to the reunion to seek revenge. She hadn't come to prove herself. She'd come because she'd been invited, and she had nothing to fear from people who'd once made her afraid. And when they tried to resurrect old cruelty, she didn't fight back with words or anger. She let the truth speak for itself. That truth arrived in the form of an Apache helicopter, in the form of a service record that detailed courage they couldn't comprehend, in the form of a life lived with purpose while they measured worth in superficial metrics. She didn't need to argue, didn't need to defend, didn't need to explain. She just existed fully and powerfully, and that was enough. The people who'd watched from afar, scrolling through the video late at night, felt something shift inside them. The ones who'd been dismissed, overlooked, judged on appearances, they saw one of their own win, not by joining the game but by changing the rules entirely. She'd shown them that success isn't about who has the loudest voice or the biggest car or the most popular friends. It's about who you become when no one is watching, what you build when everyone says you can't, how you carry yourself when the world tries to break you. Arya had become someone who commanded the sky, who protected freedom, who served something bigger than herself. And she did it all while the people who'd mocked her were busy posting selfies and chasing validation from strangers. The reunion had been meant to celebrate 10 years of growth, 10 years of becoming stronger, but the only person in that gym who'd actually grown, who'd actually become stronger, was the one they'd tried to diminish. The class loser, the girl with no friends, the one who didn't matter. She mattered more than all of them combined, and they'd had to learn that the hard way. As the mural took shape on the school's brick wall, something else happened. Letters started arriving, not to the school, to Arya, forwarded through military channels, from students, from people who'd seen the video and felt seen themselves, from kids being bullied who needed to know it gets better, from veterans who'd been dismissed in civilian life and needed the reminder that their service meant something. She read every one. Didn't respond to most, but she read them. And in the quiet of her quarters between missions and briefings, she understood what the reunion had really been about. Not revenge, not validation, but a reminder to herself and to everyone watching. That dignity doesn't need an audience. Strength doesn't need approval. And worth is measured in what you do, not what others think of you. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. That became the lesson, the moral that outlived the moment. In a world obsessed with proving ourselves, with seeking validation, with needing recognition, Arya had shown a different path. She'd shown that the loudest person isn't the strongest, that the most popular person isn't the most valuable, that real power doesn't announce itself with insults and laughter. Real power arrives in rotor blades and engine thrust, in service and sacrifice, in the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are and doesn't need permission to exist. The people at that reunion learned this lesson at great cost, lost jobs, lost reputations, lost respect. But perhaps in losing everything they thought made them important, they'd finally learn what actually matters. Perhaps in having their cruelty exposed, they'd finally understand that kindness isn't weakness, that humility isn't inferiority, that judging others says more about the judge than the judged. Or perhaps they'd learn nothing. Perhaps they'd just be angry at getting caught, at the video going viral, at the consequences finding them. Some people never learn, never grow, never change. But Arya didn't need them to change. She'd already changed herself, transformed from the girl they dismissed into the woman they feared, not because she sought revenge, but because she'd done the work, put in the hours, earned her place in the sky while they were earning nothing but hollow validation. And in the end, that was the real victory, not the viral video, not the consequences that befell her tormentors, not even the Apache landing outside the reunion. The real victory was that she'd become someone she was proud of, someone who served, someone who mattered in ways they'd never understand. She'd won by refusing to play their game, by building a life that didn't need their approval, by becoming so much more than they could imagine that when the truth finally revealed itself, it arrived like thunder. The class loser had become the only winner that mattered, and she'd done it without saying a single word in her defense, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.